Welcome back to Everything Financial Radio here on the Legacy Radio Network. We are chatting today with Mr. Jim Babka, who is president of an organization called Downsize DC. And Jim, let's talk a little bit about this whole idea. You were on a couple months ago, and I think you were maybe just starting down this road with this particular concept. And it's deny consent, and we alluded to it a bit in the first segment. But what exactly is deny consent, and where are you headed with this?
Well, Deny Consent is a brand new project that we're starting. In fact, as you and I are speaking right now, today is the day that we're launching a beta test of the first module that's going to be on that website, denyconsent.org or .com, whichever, Deny Consent. People can visit the site and kind of see this tool for themselves. But the philosophy behind it is kind of a reorientation and direction, Dennis. Most of our time, our effort, our energy is spent trying to either elect better people or get people who have already been elected to behave better. In other words, we're trying to pick a lesser thief, and once that thief gets to Washington, we're trying to ask him to be a better boy. And we think that this begging, this whole process is corrupting. We think the entire process leads to defeat and discouragement repeatedly. It's very expensive, and it's fighting it on their terms. And we notice something very odd. The people that get sent to Washington, they're not chosen by the Russians. They're not chosen by the Martians. It's not our enemies that elected our opponents. It's our neighbors. It's our family. It's our coworkers. It's our friends that are sending these people. So the real battle, the precinct, if you will, is the minds of the American public. It's your neighbor's heart is your precinct, your district, if you will. And the battleground's their conscience. And what we're doing is we're turning our direction. Instead of focusing all of our energy and effort on trying to change the way Washington behaves, we want to begin to take a moral argument back to the American people and ask them, is it okay that these things are done in your name? Do you consent to your tax dollars being used to do the following things? And so we're going to reorient and begin having that moral conversation with the American people. We're going to use our tools to do it. And we're also going to teach techniques for doing that so that people can begin having this dialogue. We talked about, in the previous segment, about electing these candidates and whether or not they had a choice. And I think consent comes into the equation in the following way. I did not vote for either of the major two-party candidates, and I will not vote for the other major two-party candidates because I've become so disgusted with what they represent that I've withdrawn my consent. So neither one of them can count on my vote. And I think increasingly, if that was the people's attitude, they would have to come up with better candidates. But maybe over time we would decide that we don't need to give all the stuff that we give to Washington, and all the stuff to the state capitol that we give to the state capitol. Maybe we could do a whole lot more of this stuff in voluntary social organization and families and frankly, a novel concept for ourselves.
Interesting. Well, Jim, it looks like I was visiting the denyconsent.org website. And for just getting started, you certainly have a lot of people that have signed on. So it seems like you've really struck a nerve. And when you start talking to people that are frustrated, to use that term, with what's going on in Washington, what would you say the number one or maybe number one and number two areas of frustration really are?
Oh wow. We have gotten over the years the best response from our particular crowd of activists to the civil liberties issues. Real ID Act, warrantless spying, NDAA now, where the proposal of the president can, basically arrest anyone he wants, declare them a terrorist, and deny them a trial. We call it kidnapping because that's what it really should be called. Morally speaking, there's no distinction. Those issues seem to be the ones that have caught on the most. I don't know if it came through when I was talking. I mean, I particularly have a passion on this campaign finance issue just from the standpoint that, it's been obvious to me now for many years that the situation is such that the game is rigged. And I'm really saddened to see as we finish this election season, so many people demoralized, depressed, upset, practically ready to jump out their own window. I just was on the phone yesterday with a business owner telling me that fellow business owners are talking about closing their doors because of the tax increases that they're expecting to come down the line. And it's discouraging. This is all very discouraging to see this kind of attitude happen. But no one really seems to trace these things back to their original problem. And our mission, here, is to try to get to the root of all this stuff, to talk about some of the strategic things that we need to do to begin to turn this all around while there's still time to do it peacefully.
Jim, as you were talking, I had a thought because you I believe you said you quoted the Declaration of Independence, and I believe it's we consent to being governed. If the founding fathers could suddenly reappear and see what the United States had become, what would their impression be?
Well, I think they wouldn't have written the Constitution in many cases. Some of them would have, because they were interested in protecting their banking interests. But many of them would say, you know what, some of the things that our opponents said at the time about what would become of us if we had a centralized government in Washington, D.C., have not only come true, they've manifested themselves in spades. And some of the revolution maybe that we were expecting. Jefferson said a revolution was going to be needed every 14 years. We haven't had that kind of thinking here. We haven't had people say, you know what, we need to fundamentally modify the contract to further restrict the power of the people who are seeking it in Washington. None of this is a surprise, by the way. If you put power out in front of people, there's going to be bad people that show up and want to get it. Once they get it, they're going to seek to expand it. And so I think they might have, kind of rethought the whole experiment and tried to find additional ways to make sure that people were able to govern themselves at the most local level possible.
Last time you were on, Jim, we chatted a bit about the bill that your organization, I believe, has been really instrumental in promoting, and that's the Read the Bills Act. Can you explain for listeners that may have missed it, what is the Read the Bills Act, and then give us an update as to where you are in maybe making that bill a little bit closer to becoming a law?
Yeah, well, we're a long way away from that, but let me say this. The Read the Bills Act, first of all, the way it works is that every member of Congress, when they want to spend more of your money, pass a law, they want to create or retain a program, if they're going to cast that yes vote, they have to sign an affidavit. And the affidavit says that they've either heard the bill read to them or they've read the entire bill for themselves. And the heard the read bill to them part says that the Constitution says that a quorum is 50% plus one of the members. We say that a quorum has to sit and listen to a literal word-for-word, in order, start-to-finish reading of the entire bill. Why? Because the mind will procure what the hiney will endure, and we recognize that if they have to sit through these rather long bills, and so many of them, that they will have fewer bills, and they will become shorter. They will cover fewer subjects. We are downsized D.C. after all. And then we say that the bill has to be posted online. So the talk show hosts like yourself, watchdog groups like downsizedc.org, and everybody in your audience is listening would have 7 days, a cooling off period, 7 days during which they could read the bill for themselves and then give their work orders or instructions to their member in Congress. And then only then would the final vote be allowed to take place. Now, a lot of people recognize that Congress is an anarchic institution. That is, they are lawless, and it's impossible to regulate them, and so they're prone to break their own rules, to violate their own rules. So we didn't stop there. We said that if you found yourself in the dock, you're tried for maybe a tax or a levy you didn't pay or a regulation you didn't abide by, that they issued out of a piece of legislation where they did not follow the procedures we spelled out in this bill, that you could present that evidence to the judge, and the judge can kick the case out of court with impunity, meaning you're free to go. And so if they want to pass meaningless, toothless laws, they can do that all day if that's what they're interested in doing, but we're suggesting that if they're going to pass the law, they need to exercise the proper due diligence in so doing. Now, in terms of where we're at, right now, only Senator Rand Paul has introduced this bill, but I do anticipate as we come into the new Congress that we are going to actually have a sponsor for the Read the Bills Act, so hopefully sometime during the first quarter in the House of Representatives as well. And we hope to be able to add to it from there. It's going to be difficult because a lot of them are scared off by this reading provision. They really don't want to be slowed down.
Well, that in and of itself is remarkable to me, that we actually have to have a bill introduced to require that our leaders, our legislators, actually read what it is that they're voting on. That's it's just shocking when you think about it. I want to shift gears in the little time we have left here, Jim. We've got probably 3.5 minutes or so. In January, there are some mandatory budget cuts that are supposed to take place. I believe it's called a sequester, actually. So I think it's about $100 billion that has to be cut in 2013.
Right.
Are they really going to do it?
I would say no, because what they always do is they kick the can down the road to a future Congress, which then agrees to do the same thing, kick the can down the road to a future Congress. This is another evidence, by the way, of something we talked about in the first segment, Dennis, that the state is in its death rattle. They're refusing to deal with these problems at even the most minute level. And if you can't do small things, you're not going to be able to do big things. It's just that simple. So I don't believe they're going to do it. And the sticking point seems to be that half of these cuts are going to take place in the defense sector, and the Republicans want to do whatever they can to protect that. So they're willing to cut a deal, even if it includes a tax increase, we're now learning. Republicans for tax increases. Didn't think that was going to happen, did you? They're going to potentially broker a tax increase so that they can keep their defense spending. And we already know that if you follow the Pentagon closely, you already know that there is just a ton of inefficiency in that system. And I'm not talking a minor amount of it. I'm not even talking a government amount. I'm talking it's beyond epic, some of the worst stories you've ever heard. And then on top of that, that we spend more than 49 other countries combined defending the interests of other countries in the world. Why is it that some of these socialist states have a socialist system? Well, the United States taxpayers taking up their defense tab. So they're allowed to have butter because we're buying their guns. And so at some point, we've got to really fundamentally reassess not just the entitlements, but the defense side as well. That's the only way that we could potentially do this in a bipartisan fashion anyway. And those are the biggest problems on the table. There are Republicans who think that anytime you even so much as slow down the spending, not cut, slow down the spending, that you are threatening the very security of their plans. One begins to wonder, for example, if Senators McCain and Graham don't actually represent the Pentagon instead of the actual states that they have behind their name.
You know, Jim, and I want to finish with this. We can go up to maybe 2 minutes. You said that you've given a couple examples where it's your belief or your opinion that the state is in its death rattle. How do you see this ultimately playing out and changing?
You know, it's kind of hard to predict the future and see what's going. All I can do is kind of tell you what the trend is here, and that is that I think that more and more people are trying to find ways to address things and solve problems themselves. There's an interesting story that came out after Hurricane Sandy about how government rescue workers lacked a truck, lacked generators, they lacked a truck, and they lacked, once they got stuff to a certain location, the forklift to take care of it. And in all three cases, they ended up having to turn to Victoria's Secret, a lingerie provider that happened to be set up at a trade show in the area. And the fact that, you know, we're told by the New York Times that it takes a big government to deal with a big storm, or that everybody acts as if we need some kind of central plan for all this stuff. I just think what we need more is an awakening, and it's occurring, and maybe not as fast enough for my taste or even your taste, but an awakening that we can't rely on the state. They don't have our best interests at heart. And that we begin doing more and more for ourselves. We voluntarily organize. We have to recognize at the end of the day that all the money they get comes from us. So, and they spend it very, very badly. I can't help but think, and in fact, I asked a crowd of people last month that I was speaking to, has anybody ever woken up with the thought that, boy, I'm so glad I have a congressman to send to Washington. Why? If I went there, I just wouldn't know how to vote on those bills, and I just know he's doing a better job than I could ever possibly do. And everybody laughs. We all kind of know this in our heart, and I think we're just now starting to get to the point where we're beginning to recognize it really does come back to us, and we can do a better job. How does that manifest itself? I don't know, but that's the trend that I see coming, and I think the politicians and the bureaucrats and the media class, the political classes they're typically called, all are threatened by this, and I think you're seeing overreaction on their part in many of these regulations and emergency steps and different things they're doing.
Jim, we're going to leave it there. The website is downsizedc.org. I would encourage you to go check it out. And the newer website, denyconsent.org. Everything Financial Radio will return after these words. Stay with us.